Good Sunday morning. NBC News has learned that U.S., Israeli, and Hamas negotiators are closing in on a deal to release some of the nearly 240 hostages held in Gaza in exchange for a pause in fighting. But these sources caution nothing has been finalized yet. The outline of a deal has been put together during weeks of talks in Doha, Qatar. One senior Israeli official tells NBC News as the military pressure increases, the chances of a release of hostages grows because Hamas is desperate for a ceasefire. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is also under pressure. Families of the hostages have been on a 5-day march from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem and are fiercely criticizing the prime minister for not doing more to secure their release. On Saturday, Netanyahu emphasized that no deal is done.
Regarding the hostages, there are a lot of unfounded rumors, a lot of incorrect publications. I would like to clarify, until this very moment, there wasn't a deal, but I'd like to promise you that when we do have something to say, we will report on that.
And in a Washington Post op-ed, President Biden wrote, quote, "As long as Hamas clings to its ideology of destruction, a ceasefire is not peace." But at a press conference earlier this week, the president sounded more optimistic.
Look, I have been deeply involved in moving on the hostage negotiation. I don't want to get ahead of myself here because I don't know what's happened in the last 4 hours, but we've gotten great cooperation from the Qataris.
Joining me now is Deputy National Security Advisor John Feiner. John, welcome back to Meet the Press.
Thanks very much for having me.
So, John, let's delve into the details of this breaking news. NBC News has confirmed, based on conversations with two sources who are familiar with the negotiations, that they are closing in on a potential deal to release some of the hostages in exchange for a pause in the fighting. How close are they to a deal? What can you tell us?
Well, what I can say at this point is that some of the outstanding areas of disagreement in a very complicated, very sensitive negotiation have been narrowed, that I believe we are closer than we have been in quite some time, maybe closer than we have been since the beginning of this process to getting this deal done. And we are following this minute by minute, hour by hour, and have been for a number of weeks, up to and including the president, for whom this is a major priority, as you just heard. But at this point, we really need to adhere to the mantra that nothing is agreed until everything is agreed. Sensitive negotiations like this can fall apart at the last minute. So we're not going to outline all the details of what is still being discussed. We believe that this needs to get done, that people are being held in unconscionable conditions inside Gaza, including a number of Americans, and that they need to be allowed to come home. But until the deal is done and people actually start to move and depart, nothing is finalized. And so we're going to stay at this until we get to that point.
Well, let me ask you about what the Qatari Prime Minister said this morning. The Prime Minister said that the remaining challenges to the deal are, quote, very minor. Is that how you would characterize it? And can you tell us what those remaining sticking points are?
So, look, what I would say is that the Qataris deserve a lot of credit for the role that they are playing in helping broker this, and they are as close to the negotiations as anyone. But I don't want to characterize it beyond what I've said already. We believe that they are closer than they have been. We believe that many of the outstanding areas of disagreement and of difference have been narrowed, if not closed off entirely. But there are still issues that remain, and until those issues are resolved, there is no deal. But it is very much our objective to finish one and to get these people home. We think it is possible, but it's not done yet.
And in terms of the contours of the deal, can you give us some specificity? How many hostages are we talking about, John? Are we talking about 12? Are we talking about more than 24, dozens? How would you characterize the number of people?
I guess what I would say is because I don't want to get into the issues that are under discussion among the parties, I'm not going to give a lot more detail other than to say we are talking about considerably more than 12. But beyond that, I want to see where this goes and don't want to say anything that would jeopardize actually completion of the deal, which is the most important thing.
And are all of the potential hostages who would be released women and children, John?
Again, these are issues in the talks themselves. These are issues under active discussion among the parties. So I think it would not be helpful to the completion of the deal, which is our biggest priority, to start to lay those out in public at the right time. And certainly if this deal is completed, we will have a lot more to say about how it all got done. But right now, the priority is actually getting it done. I
know you can't say a whole lot. I have to keep trying. Are we talking about a prisoner exchange, John?
I mean, again, what you're talking about, what you're asking me about, quite understandably, it's your job, is topics that are at issue directly among the parties and in the talks. And so my laying those out in public, we believe, is not actually helpful to getting this deal across the line. But these are exactly the topics that are under discussion. I just want to leave it to them and give them the space and the privacy to be able to work this out and get the deal completed before we start detailing these things on television. I understand, but just big picture, would it include what, frankly, so many people all around the globe have been calling for, which is a ceasefire? Are we talking about a ceasefire for several days? I believe 5 days has been reported. So without getting into the duration, one of the things that the parties themselves have said, including publicly, is that this could and would likely include an extended period of a pause in the fighting, multiple day period of a pause in the fighting. We think that would be both necessary to actually be able to execute the deal, because executing the deal would involve moving hostages around what is a very dangerous battlefield in Gaza, but it would also have the ancillary benefit, the important benefit of making it easier to distribute humanitarian assistance throughout Gaza, because one of the big challenges has been it's hard to move basic materials around during the course of the fighting. It would enable us, we believe, to get more humanitarian assistance into Gaza. That's a priority under any circumstances, even if there is no hostage deal. But having a deal that causes a pause in the fighting would make it easier to get more in faster. So there are other benefits that are not necessarily directly related to the deal that we think would be caused if they can get this done. And would there be Americans involved in this release, John? Can you say that? We know that there are Americans held. It is very important to the president and to all of us that Americans be included in any arrangement. And beyond that, I'm not going to characterize who might or might not be coming out. But that is obviously the highest priority for the president. He has no higher obligation, obviously, than to the safety and security of Americans, including Americans who are in a terrible situation like those being held in Gaza. We've obviously learned that 2 of the hostages devastatingly were found dead. Do you know the status of the remaining hostages? Are they alive, John? So one of the things that's incredibly challenging about this situation is we don't have good fidelity, good information about the condition and the status of all of the hostages who are being held. Obviously, they're being held by Hamas. The United States government does not speak directly to Hamas. Hamas has indicated that there are a significant number of hostages that they are holding who are alive. Those are the hostages we are negotiating for. We cannot speak to exact numbers being held, exact numbers who are alive or who potentially tragically have been killed, like the 2 that you mentioned. But we know that the number is significant, and we know that it is, for all these reasons, very important that this happen as quickly as possible. The longer people are held in a dangerous situation, the more likely it is that something tragic beyond what's already happened to them could happen, and we don't want to see that. Yeah, John, just big picture here. As you know, more than 100 countries have called for a full and immediate ceasefire. Does the United States risk being out of step with the rest of the world on this issue? So leaving aside what other countries are saying or doing, I want to be clear about our position, because I think it's been consistent and it's been where the president has been for quite some time, and I think where he's going to remain, which is that right now Hamas, which perpetrated the horrific act that began this phase of the conflict on October 7th, not only is not calling for a ceasefire, but they are saying they did this specifically to create a condition of perpetual war, and that if given the opportunity to do it again, they would do it again and again and again until Israel is eliminated. Under these circumstances, we do not believe it is responsible to ask Israel to stop fighting Hamas. We believe the threat that occurred in a horrific way on October 7th remains and will remain until it has been sufficiently diminished by these military operations. That does not mean that we are not supportive of humanitarian pauses, including the type of pause for multiple days that could occur from the hostage deal, but also including pauses in the fighting during the course of normal combat operations to allow humanitarian assistance to be distributed. It also doesn't mean that we do not make very clear that we value every single innocent life equally. Palestinian lives, Israeli lives. And we raise our concerns directly when there are operations that are taking place that we don't believe prioritize that.
Well, let me follow up with you on that point. The Qatari prime minister said today that Israel's actions at Al-Shifa Hospital are a, quote, crime. Does the White House stand by Israel's assessment that Hamas is headquartered underneath the hospital? And are you confident that Israel is following international law?
We've been quite clear about our view of Shifa. Shifa is the largest hospital in Gaza. It is the most advanced hospital in Gaza. There are severely ill patients there. There are also a number of civilians who have gathered there to seek refuge during the course of the conflict, and those lives need to be protected. But we have been equally clear that our intelligence, U.S. intelligence information, not just Israeli intelligence information, suggests that Hamas has used Al-Shifa in an unconscionable way as a command and control facility for the planning of terrorist attacks and the execution of terrorist attacks, and continues to do so. That does not, in our view, mean that Israel should conduct airstrikes on the hospital or ground assaults on the hospital. We've been equally clear about that. But Hamas has put these people in severe jeopardy by the way in which it's conducting this war. So this is a microcosm of the real challenge associated with this entire conflict, and we've laid out our position. It's the same position I've just articulated. And
are you confident Israel is following international law, John? Just yes or no there.
We are confident that it is our position that it needs to. When we have seen issues that are raised based on incidents on the ground, we raise them privately and directly with the government of Israel.
John, let me just, you're saying that Israel
play judge and jury on this question.
Yeah, let me just follow up quickly. You said Israel needs to follow international law. Are you confident they are following international law?
What I can say is it is not our position, certainly my position as a policymaker, to play real-time judge and jury on the question of any particular incident. When we see things that concern us, we raise them. We have done that during the course of this conflict. We will continue to do that. And again, just to restate it, it is our position that all countries, including Israel, including the United States, need to adhere to laws of armed conflict. Hamas, by the way, does not only not hold itself to that standard, it openly boasts about its willingness and its reality of violating those standards. So that is the challenge.
The president said in his op-ed that the United States is prepared to issue visa bans against extremists attacking civilians in the West Bank. How soon will the U.S. move to enact those bans? Is that a process that's already underway?
So I think you've heard the president speak about publicly, I think more so maybe than many of his, if not all of his predecessors, his concerns about violence in the West Bank perpetrated by extremist settlers against innocent Palestinians. He's also raised those concerns very directly with Prime Minister Netanyahu, as we all have with our Israeli counterparts. You saw in the president's op-ed that the consequences for this sort of action could include visa bans against people who are associated with violence against innocent Palestinians in the West Bank. I suspect you'll see us lay out more details of that approach in the coming days, but this is serious. We think it's potentially hugely destabilizing. We think it could lead to greater instability in the West Bank, which is in nobody's interest. And so we are going to try to do our part to help the Palestinian Authority and the Israeli Defense Forces keep a lid on what we believe is very troubling actions in the West Bank.
John, would the administration go even further and call for freezing settlements in the West Bank?
I mean, I'm not going to get ahead of policy statements or decisions that have not been made or articulated at this point. We are quite clear about our concerns. Our concerns are first and foremost related to violence that is being perpetrated. A number of Palestinians in the West Bank who have been killed that is beyond any year since the Second Intifada. And we're going to try to take actions aimed at reducing that and hopefully eliminating it over time.
John Feiner, thank you so much for your time and your insights this morning. We really appreciate it.
Thanks again for having me.
Thanks for watching. Stay updated about breaking news and top stories on the NBC News app or follow us on social media.